So around a month ago, I made a video talking about how I wanted to break my phone addiction. And I presented sort of 5 different techniques that I was going to use over the next month to see how they helped. So after giving it a go for the past month, I'm going to unpack to you what things worked really well and what I'm going to continue doing, and then the things that I'd probably ditch. Welcome back everyone, my name's James Nightingale for those that haven't come here before. Just to say a big welcome to all of you who are new. I know that the channel's been growing a lot recently, which is really exciting. But anyway, at the end of February, I was presenting a video that was called The 5 Steps to Phone Addiction Freedom. So these 5 steps were: 1, the basics, which was effectively turning off all notifications and using grayscale. Step 2 was decluttering my phone and also turning off something called Raise to Wake. Step 3 was logging out, so logging out of social media apps and accounts. Step 4 was really a phone rulebook, so good ways for me to healthily use my phone. And step 5 was what I called the dilemma of the checkout line, so ways of not constantly reaching for my phone when I get a little bit bored. So I'm going to power through all of these now and tell you exactly what worked really well and maybe what was not so good. I've always heard that turning off all your notifications is a game changer, and that it's the first thing that you should ever do when you're going to try and control your phone addiction. I'm not so sure. And before I started this experiment, I kind of only had very few notifications coming from some quite helpful apps where it was also quite useful to have notifications from. And one thing I did mention actually in the first video is that because I wasn't getting notifications, I felt like I had to check those apps more often when I was expecting a message, because obviously it wasn't coming through to me. So my takeaway here is to utilize what Apple calls their sort of focus modes, which I'm going to start setting up now. And effectively what it means is that when you're in a certain phase of the day, so for example if you're in your working phase of the day, you turn on a specific focus mode that you want to, say, block out all notifications except for emergencies from your close family and friends. But then also when you're maybe being expected to be picked up and you want to allow notifications from anyone, or at least someone who's going to pick you up, changing your focus mode to maybe, like, I don't know, a casual focus mode or non-work focus mode. Because what I did during this experiment was I set up a focus mode which allowed basically just notifications from my mum, dad, sister and fiance, so that I could sort of receive calls from them. Initially I realised that this stopped things like calls from the hospital or the bank, and I was like, that's not a good thing, I actually need to allow those. So I allowed all calls, and I just went back and forth with lots of different ideas. So my sort of takeaway is you've got to be a bit more intentional about certain periods of time in the day allowing the right notifications through. So using these focus modes could actually be a really good way of doing that. So that's what I'm going to do now from this point onwards. And I just think I'd quickly mention grayscale. To be honest, I forgot to use this the entire time. I think I used it maybe twice, and it was so easy to turn back on. It's just a triple click of the power button that I never really used it, because when I had it on and I didn't really want it on, or I wanted to see something more clearly, I just turn it off and then I'd forget about it. So it's not really been that useful. So I'd probably call myself a minimalist, and I love to get rid of things and sort of cut out the things that aren't essential in my life at maybe a slightly obsessive rate. So this idea of decluttering my phone was actually very welcome, and I quite enjoyed the restart, I suppose, with all the apps that I didn't use. One thing I take away from doing this though is that occasionally I did need an app like Instagram or YouTube to maybe upload or post something. So what I'd suggest for you, and what worked well for me, was only downloading that app that you need when you need to use it. Maybe it's once a week, just because it means that if you have downloaded Instagram, say, to post something and then you don't delete it, you're just so easy just going to go back on it and start scrolling again. I know I would. So in summary, I would definitely encourage you, cut out all the apps you don't need to use, and maybe only download an app when you actually need to use it, if it's one that's going to distract you a lot and you don't need very often. One thing that this experiment is definitely showing to me is that I have very, very poor willpower or self-control when it comes to using my phone. Also, I haven't noticed the lack of Raise to Wake, which is one of the settings that I turned off to help me not get as distracted. I've literally not noticed it being gone at all. I don't notice the difference, so I mean, I'm just going to keep it that way if it works for me. Right, this was an interesting one. I would definitely recommend it, and it worked really well for me initially. However, this experiment fell at a very awkward time for me, as it was quite a significant time in the NFL off-season. I'm a huge New York Giants fan, as you can probably tell by the Odell Beckham Jr. poster that's on my wall. And it happened to be during this period of time that we signed some of our biggest players to massive deals, and I was constantly wanting to see, if we'd done it. And it also fell at a point where we were signing loads of new players from other teams, which was really exciting. And the way I've always got this kind of news is through Twitter, just because Twitter's by far the most immediate and quickest way of getting these news items. And I've actually had the Twitter app deleted for ages. However, the sort of web version of Twitter is actually almost just as good. And so I've kind of used that as if it's just the app. And while initially logging out of Twitter really did help, I would obviously occasionally log back in to check and see if anyone had been signed. And then I'd forget to log out because it's not something I'm used to. And then every time I'd go back in, I'd just continue scrolling and forget to log out, and it kind of just fizzled out. So I partly blame my lack of self-control and maybe lack of commitment to the experiment, but I also partly blame the fact that it fell during quite a significant time in this NFL offseason, so that's my excuse. But in hindsight, what I probably would have done is actually just allowed notifications from the NFL app so that I would get told when breaking news had occurred and I could check. But then not gone on Twitter at all on my phone and only used it on my laptop when I have to be much more intentional about using Twitter. Before I move on to the next point, if you're enjoying this video and you're not yet subscribed, then please do consider subscribing, because nearly 95% of the people watching my videos are not subscribed. And so it would be really great if you could come and join me in this journey of work and rest and learning how to do this better. So the fourth point was the phone rulebook. Overall, I'm a big fan of this actually. The main rule that I implemented was turning my phone off and my watch from 8 PM on a Saturday to 8 PM on a Sunday. On the days that I actually did this, I did actually really enjoy it. I didn't have that immediate withdrawal symptoms. Because I had lots of other things going on that I was enjoying on that day, I actually felt a lot more free to just take in the scenery. It was a bit more challenging when I had to take public transport, and I'm so used to just using my phone to pay for stuff or show a tram ticket, and I obviously just had to use my debit card instead, which was fine. It also meant that when I was on the tram, instead of just scrolling on my phone, which I would always used to do, I actually decided to look out the window properly for most of the journey, and I sort of saw things that I haven't seen very much in Nottingham, things that I didn't actually know existed. And one thing that I noticed, and I'm definitely not judging these people because I've been these people for ages, but literally almost every single person on the tram is there sort of scrolling at their phone, looking down at themselves. And again, I don't blame them because I've done this for so long. But it does seem kind of sad that we're always doing this. Now, I have to confess that there was one Sunday where I had a hockey match, and I was waiting to be picked up by one of my teammates, and I had to have my phone on to be able to know when he was coming, where he was. So I did slightly break my rule then, but I'll promise I did keep my phone in the boot when I was travelling there, and it went straight off after the hockey match. So just a confession over. Obviously, some of the other rules that I mentioned when I first made the video was, not taking it to social occasions, not taking it to the library. These kind of worked and were interesting, but none of them were really as impactful as that first one I've mentioned. So I would highly recommend having a day with no screens, or at least maybe no phone, as it really is quite good for your rest. And the fifth and final point was obviously the dilemma of the checkout line and what to do, when I'm standing there and so easily want to pull out my phone. And obviously this idea of writing down ideas and also praying for people did work really well. I've generated at least 15 new ideas for the YouTube channel using this technique. I did find though, if I had my phone in my pocket, I would so much more easily check that than pull out the paper and pen and write down. It's amazing how much more easy it is for me to just pull out the phone, and there's so little friction between that compared to the pen and paper. And it yet again showed how little my willpower is. One of my biggest takeaways is probably that if you don't want to use your phone as much, it's probably easier just to not have it on you than to have it on you and have all these rules in place. I think it's just so much easier just to remove it entirely if you don't really need it. I'll be honest, I definitely don't think I've broken this phone addiction, but I'm definitely on the way. I would highly recommend trying some of these ones that I've said have been a bit better. But if I had to choose one that was sort of the most effective, it would probably be turning off my phone and my watch on a Sunday, as I think that this really does help you to rest much better on that day off, and it will equip you so much better for the week of work that comes up after that. Anyway, if you want to watch the original video that I made about this, then you can watch it up here. But thank you so much for watching if you made it this far, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.